We don't do it alone. The tanker people. No SR-71 ever flies without a whole sky full of airplanes, the tankers. In the 25 years that the airplane was operational, to my knowledge, the tanker guys never missed a rendezvous. Sometimes the SR wasn't there, the tanker guys always were. To give you an idea of the tanker support required, flying out of Kadena, Japan, over to Vietnam, on one pass through the target area, there's a tanker on alert when you take off on the ground. There's two tankers airborne, which you refuel one of them immediately after takeoff. You fly over Vietnam, you go down into Thailand, you refuel with a tanker. There's two tankers there, there's always a spare. There's a tanker spare on the ground at Tak Lee. There's a tanker spare on the ground at what was then Clark Air Base. You come back to Kadena, there's a tanker airborne in case you need to refuel and divert, and there's a tanker on the ground. I lost count, I think that's 10. For one airplane, you fly one pass across the area of interest. You put that together and say, okay, we flew into Tripoli, we flew into the Sinai Peninsula, we flew into Egypt, we flew into all those areas out there, we fly up north into the Barents Sea. You can imagine the tanker support that's required to make that happen. It's unbelievable. And that's one of the reasons why the airplane went to bed, because it just cost too bloody much to keep it alive, unfortunately. Okay, Kelly Johnson, aeronautical engineer of this amazing guy. He conceived this airplane. Let's back up a little bit. And this is what started the whole thing. The Cold War. We were overflying Russia with the U-2. Well, no offense, Gary Powers got shot down. But even before that, we knew that we were not able to overfly with the airplanes we had because they were improving their missile capability. And the decision they arrived at was you had to have an airplane that went fast and high. And that's where the SR came in. You can see some of the stuff that the Skunk Works had done previously. Just fantastic work. The space programs is the key right there. The Corona program was an overhead space system with a camera. Well, the overhead problem is that when you put a satellite in orbit, it's fixed position. It stays right there. So if you want to take a photograph of some other place, you got to move it. Well, you can't move those things indefinitely because of onboard fuel, and it takes time. Plus, the resolution at that time was not as good as it became much later. So, therefore, an airplane. Plus, the SR and the U-2 could be moved to areas of interest and respond quickly. However, that was lost in the melee as we go on. If I go the right way. Yeah. The Skunk Works. You remember the Lavender cartoon? Anybody that old remembers the Lavender cartoon? Okay. He had the skunk. And that's where Kelly got the idea of the Skunk Works. And this particular airplane, 972, was one of the last airplanes to fly. It was with the test force. And, that's how we got the Skunk Works out started. Got its nickname. Okay, I said 8,000 feet below RCS. You don't want to be able to track it on radar. And I'll point out some of the reasons why this airplane is so successful. The beginning program was called the Archangel. That was the A-11. It was a little smaller than the SR, flown only by the CIA. It was the forerunner for the A-12, which the CIA did operate in Southeast Asia. It was a single pilot airplane, had only a camera on it, was a little lighter, flew a little higher. And it was the lead into the SR-71, which is the two crew members. And with multiple sensors. We had a whole bunch of cameras, we had a defensive system, we had an electromagnetic receiver, and we had the option to put on either radar or camera depending on the mission. There were no computer-aided designs, no computer-directed construction of machinery to engineer and forges and stuff that this airplane is made from. You cannot use Sears Roebuck tools on titanium. It contaminates it, and the titanium erodes and loses its strength. So you had to have even special hand tools to work on the airplane. The interesting thing about the titanium is we don't have any titanium in the United States. Had to get it someplace else. And so the CIA developed a shadow company. We bought our titanium from the Russians to make our SR-71. Because of the speed and the heat generated in the engine, we had to have a special fuel, a high flashpoint fuel. I talked about the tankers. The atmosphere in a fuel tank, when the fuel is consumed, becomes highly toxic and highly volatile. And at the speeds this airplane flew, it was hot enough to ignite that fumes. So we used nitrogen to inert the fuel tanks. Even though we had that high flashpoint fuel, that was still a hazard. We had special hydraulic fluids and special oil that were in some cases almost solid at room temperature, but they had to be that way in order to stand the temperatures that they encountered when the airplane flew. These are the hot spots. And you can see it gets really warm. You can hold your gloved hand up on the side of the windshield. You can feel the heat from that against the back of your hand. Everything inside the airplane, no matter what the material was, had to be flexible. The airplane grows as it gets hot. And one of the examples I saw one time, there's a thing called the Bendix drive, which is the gearbox which drives the hydraulics and the generators. The drive shaft from the Bendix drive hangs down about 10 degrees when the airplane is on the ground. At altitude and speed, the shaft lifts up and goes horizontal. An idea of how much the airplane grows. We had electrical wiring and all the piping, everything. All these various materials had to be compatible enough to grow with the aircraft. Highly technical problem. The next page will show you the radar reflectivity. The graphite parts, they absorb or reflect the radar. You notice that the vertical fins are canted inward. That's so the radar signal hits it and bounces up instead of back down. Also part of the stealth technology, which was also passed on. Somebody mentioned the 117. This is the beginning of what turned out to be the 117 in terms of radar cross-section. The black paint contributes to this, also to the reflectivity or lack thereof. And speaking of black paint, you know, the airplanes were out at SAC at Offutt, out in the open, exposed to the weather. And the decision came when we got the local community to kick out the money to build a new museum. All these airplanes had to be cleaned up and fixed up and moved. About that same time, the Gulf War broke out, and there was a move afoot to get the SR active again. Well, we had 2 engines in the SR-71, and they wanted them back. We said, okay, you can have the engines back, we want black paint. So they gave us black paint, the original black paint for the SR-71 and the U-2, so we could repaint them and take them down to the museum. Now, I guarantee you the EPA ain't going to approve that black paint anymore. Probably not even then. Heat, cameras, film, glass. You got to look out from the airplane. You got to look through a glass panel to see the ground. Okay, at those kind of temperatures, that glass gets hot and it fogs over and you can't see through there to take a picture. So what do? You got to cool the glass. You begin with a piece that's 4 inches thick, and you use a cryogenic cooler, which I think means nitrogen, and you cool that glass so it stays clear and you can photograph through it. Nobody ever thought of that before. You take a picture. Well, a picture is a picture. No, a picture is not a picture. I mentioned about the oil being solid. Other stuff there. Okay. Double delta wing. Unique combination. Shows you how much the front forward body provides lift to the airplane. The airplane is 107 feet long. about 50 feet wide. It's a big airplane. It doesn't look that big until you can put it side by side with something else. The B-58 down in the museum is about the same size. It's on the ground. You can see it a little bit better. But that lifting body provided, or that forward body provided a whole lot of lift, as you can see. It's hard to tell in this picture. I've got another one that's better. The inlets, the little points sticking out there on the inlet cones, they stick down, they point down and in just a little bit, so that in level flight, they get the airflow straight on, because the airplane flies about 2 degrees nose up. The L-bond flight controls are a mixture of what they call L-bonds. The elevators and the ailerons are combined together. This gives a magnificent roll capability and a great pitch capability. And in this airplane, that was all that really mattered, pitch and roll. You didn't care about anything else. I'll get into that a little bit more. And we discovered that with a square mounted nose section on the fuselage, it required an extra amount of elevator trim to keep the nose up and keep that 2-degree attitude. So a bright engineer decided, hey, okay, we'll just tilt the nose on the airplane up 2 degrees. So we took the nose section right in front of the cockpit and milled in a 2-degree lift. And that took care of it. So we got rid of the elevator trim, got rid of the extra drag, and got our fuel consumption back on the cruise airplane. Also, the nose section can carry either a radar or a camera. And that was, of course, according to whatever the mission was. Okay, where am I now? Tires. Tire limit speed was 240 knots. Our normal takeoff speed was about 210, and we learned that the hard way. Because out of the deal in the summertime, it gets hot, and if you put a full load of fuel on that SR-71, those tires are going to get hot, and you're not going to get 240 knots before one of them blows off. So we only put 45,000 pounds of fuel on for normal training missions. And the double delta has a unique aerodynamic effect. When you rotate the airplane to lift off, it causes a downward pressure on the tires until the airplane actually lifts. That, in combination with the weight and the heat, caused tire failure. We lost a couple of airplanes because of that. And the landing gear, by the way, is the largest forged titanium piece on the airplane. All right.
We have to use a little, I don't know why that.
Where was that? Here?
It's lined up,
I mean, where do you push?
just on the,
Oh, okay.
don't wiggle your finger.
Okay. This aluminum shiny cannon here is titanium, and that's in there for 2 reasons. The landing gear retracts into that, and that serves the purpose of protecting the airplane in case the tires should explode after retraction, and it also protects the tires from the heat developed by the airplane. Now let's see if I can do this. Ready. That's the assembly line of the Skunk Works. Airplanes being assembled. All airplanes, every one was hand fabricated, by hand, no automatic stuff of any kind. The important thing here I want to point out is that you see these little, barely can, tables out there around the assembly line. Kelly Johnson's management technique was, if you're the manager, you're on the floor with your people, with your hardware. If you got a problem, you fix it. Don't come to me, you fix it. Hands-on all the way. That's why he could produce airplanes in such a short period of time with such high quality. He had good guys doing a hard job, hands-on. Because of the instability of the aircraft, he had a unique pedostatic system which required 2 inputs, one for yaw and one for pitch. Pitch being the primary issue with this airplane. Anybody recognize that cockpit? That's right out of a B-52. One airplane I flew before I went to the SR-71. I was amazed that they had round dials in this aircraft. It's as sophisticated as it is. The only instruments here that came from before, the attitude director indicator, the heading indicator, vertical velocity, and the altimeter. The altimeter and the vertical velocity are absolutely useless at altitude because your air density is is so thin. They don't react in time to give you any information you can use. The ball up on top is the standby attitude indicator, which when I flew the airplane early on, was down here, and you couldn't see it. No matter how hard you tried, you couldn't see it. The instruments that you use primarily for flight is the triple display indicator, which gives you Mach, keys, knots of good airspeed, and altitude. You flew a climb and cruise profile to try to keep the keys constant and keep the airplane climbing just a little bit all the way around. We have manual controls for the inlets. Down here on the left-hand side, you have controls for the spiking of the doors to control the airflow if you had to go manually. But I was dumbfounded that the airplane of this sophistication is using, World War II instruments. Amazing. Now, we did find a good solution to one of our problems. The attitude director indicator also gave you the ILS steering information. So we wired the steering bars for pitch steering bars, which is that little yellow thing right there, into the nav system, so as you can control your pitch with the little steering bars. A magnificent defensive system, which would negate almost anything that shot at it, which is really, I shouldn't say not important because it is, but they use heat-seeking missiles. The speed of the airplane and the heat plume from the airplane, the heat plume is way behind the airplane. So a heat-seeking missile is going to explode behind the airplane. And we got shot at maybe about 1,000 times. They say nobody ever got hit. Some of the guys did see the telephone poles, as we call it, going past. And I think one of the CIA birds came home with a piece of shrapnel in it. But the SAC guys all got away scot-free. Oh, we should have. We had a unique radio that we used to communicate with our tankers. It gave us a azimuth and distance, and they had the same thing in their airplane, so we could make our rendezvous, and each of us knew where the other guy was, so we knew we were going to come out, bottom out to the air fueling track at the right place. And we had a bunch of other radios. This has got the wire bent backwards because it sticks down in the airstream, and it was going to bend backward anyway. The navigation system came out of what was going to be a cruise missile for the B-52. But the missile program died, and they took the navigation system and modified it to fit the SR-71. The Astro Tracker dome was right there, right behind the second cockpit, just in front of the refueling door. All the information is loaded into the nav system about an hour before takeoff. And it has the magnificent capability in those days, tracking 3 stars in broad daylight and give you that kind of navigation accuracy. I talked about the fuel. A high flash point, you can't light it with a match. You can drop a match in a bucket of it and the match will go out. It's not going into the water. It's highly toxic, very hard to handle, but look what it does. That's the engine start. I'm not sure the Buick start. 2 Buick start carts. A start cart with 2 Buick engines in tandem, rev to about 10,000 RPM to crank the engine over to about 4,000 RPM before you take the throttle out of cutoff and put fuel. When you put the fuel in, the TED activates automatically, and it's the oxygen, it's the air that explodes, and that starts the fuel, the engine running. You use this TED starter every time you like to start the engines, of course. Every time you light the afterburner, you use that same stuff to get them going. The engine's on display now at the SAC Museum. The compressor section is on your right. That isn't displaying quite like it's supposed to. Anyway, those tubes are the bypass tubes that move air from the inlet back to the afterburner at the high Mach in order to give you the thrust that the afterburner has to have. Now then, The turbofan engine has one serious limitation. It cannot consume supersonic air. It has to have subsonic air. Well, if you're flying supersonic, what do you do with that air? You run it past the engine and put it back, throw it into the afterburner. Engine on test stand. There's an example of how hot that engine gets when they run it on test stand. It's very critical to keep that shock wave trapped inside the inlet, because if it pops out, layman's term, it creates a tremendous amount of drag. And the airplane will yaw and roll toward the inlet that pop the shock. In the early days, when I was there, we didn't have automatic recovery. So what you did is you pulled both throttles back to the military. That disengaged the shock on the other side, so you had both shock waves expelled. Went back in to the minimum burner, and as you accelerated and got that going again, both shocks got trapped back in the inlet again, and you're on your way. Usually, you're on your way. Sometimes it happened in a critical portion. You might have to abort the mission. We were coming back after flying a mission across Vietnam. On our climb out of Thailand, at about 65 or so thousand feet, we had an unstart. We call it an unstart. Usually you can see them coming, because out on the lower corner of the cockpit, there are double needle gauges, one on top of the other, one for the bypass doors and one for the spike. And if they begin to separate, you begin to see two needles, you know you're going to have a problem. And usually you can catch it and operate the malfunctioning needle spike manually, and you don't have a problem. You won't have quite as much efficiency, but you won't have it, you won't get into trouble. Well, I had no warning. This thing popped the shock. It slapped my head against the side of that canopy. Didn't knock me unconscious, but I was dazed severely. And I remember sticking my elbow in my gut, grabbing the stick, and telling my backseater, "Bob, I can't see anything. Are we right side up?" And he said, "Yeah." I said, "Okay, watch it, because I can't see." Well, I got my vision back, probably just a few seconds, but it scared the hell out of me. So anyway, we recaptured the shock, and we flew home back to Kenya. We landed, and the first thing our crew chief said is, "Did you have an unstart?" We said, "Yep." "What happened to the engine?" I said, "Nothing, worked just fine coming home." At the tail end of the airplane, there are what they call turkey feathers, and they fold together and they fluctuate in and out to keep the temperature and pressure in the afterburner with the most efficient operation. About half those turkey feathers that came off the engine. We didn't even know it. Really know it's fine. Testimony to what a great engine that J58 is. Okay. I want to see if I can do this, but okay, we don't want any of that stuff. That's how you tend to go about how the air is passed around the engine into the afterburner. 1 year of training. When I first went out to Beale, I was in charge of my RSO, backseater, and I. We were put in charge of the simulator section. We had a magnificent simulator for the day and age. It mimicked the airplane almost perfectly. We had an outstanding technical crew from IBM. We had an IBM computer complex that was bigger than this room. And back in those days, you made a tape. You cut a card, and you made a tape, and you fed it into this computer mass. And that was how we made corrections for the flight simulator. We would meet each crew after their flight, these are training flights, and debrief them and find out what happened, if anything unique experience they might have. Go down to the simulator, and our tech guys would write new cards and new tapes, and we would modify the simulator on the spot. The idea of the simulator, unlike many simulator programs, was not to embarrass you, not to kill you, but to teach you how to fly the airplane and teach you how the systems work and how they interacted with each other. That's why we had such a good simulator program. And every pilot will tell you that when he got to his first ride, the only thing different about being in the airplane was the airplane moved and the simulator didn't. It was, you were that much at home. Also, we were required, if we didn't fly within a week, we had to take a simulator ride before we could fly again. Normally, we got 3 flights a month, and ordinarily you had simulator rides often enough through your ground training schedule. That wasn't a problem. I remember one time we went, I think, 10 days. I did get the simulator ride. And when we took off and we're climbing out over the mountains there, and I said, Bobby, I'm so far behind this airplane, I don't know where we are. You can get ahead of you that fast, or I'm that slow. Probably I'm that slow. The pilots got 5 flights in the trainer. 5th flight was your stand-board ride, your checkout. The RSOs sometimes got extra flights before they flew with their pilot for the first time. But your first solo flight together was after the pilot had his checkout. So the 6th flight for the pilot was the first crew flight, the time you flew together. The first time you went Mach 3 and all that kind of good stuff, and those are all milestones that you reached. That mentions 9th flight. You know, I've never been afraid to fly at night. But in the SR-71, I was bloody nervous, I'll tell you that. And we had a night flight one night without an autopilot. And that was the last time we ever flew at night without an autopilot. I mentioned the instruments, how you can't see their corrections that are required. In the daytime, that big old boom sticks out right on the horizon. And it's easy to use the autopilot trim wheel to adjust your climb speed, the climb rate. You can see the move up and down. You can't see that at night. If you can't see your pitch corrections on your instruments, what are you going to do? Well, you're going to chase the damn thing. And a little bit of correction, and you see what happens, a little bit more, and you get impatient, you get too much, and then overreacts. And what do you get? It's called a phugoid. You guys know what that is. You go down, well, you get behind the airplane, and if you aren't careful, you're going to crash. Well, that's why you don't fly at night without an autopilot. This is one of the modified suits that has the built-in AOS and more room for you to move around. Kelly Johnson insisted on ejection seats. SAC wanted the capsule like the B-58 had. Kelly says, nope, they're too expensive, too heavy. We're going to use ejection seat and spacesuits. And that's what we did. The thing worked perfectly. Unfortunately, we demonstrated its use from ground 0 to 80,000 feet. And it worked just like it was supposed to, and the suits worked like they were supposed to. Nobody died. Give you an idea how long it takes to get down from altitude. This is just another look at the suit from the other side. We each had 2 suits, so we had about 45 pounds, you know. Here's the interesting part. The silver thing on the left is your pressure regulator, the one on the right is your temperature control. And the strap around the neck, if that suit inflates, that neck ring is going to go right up here. And you're going to be stuck and you can't move your head. So you always pull that thing really tight. So if the suit should inflate, you can keep your head down and still, because you got to look down and see into the airplane. The altitude training, they would put us in a small compression chamber in our suits, take us to 60,000 feet and do decompression so we can experience what happens when the suit inflates. Your gloves get fat, you can move around with touching things and trying to move instruments and gauges and dials and knobs with those fat fingers was really difficult. But you could do what you had to do. The faceplate on the pilot's helmet, the original ones had a reflection capability or a reflection feature where all you could see was your nose in the faceplate. You had to look past the reflection of your nose to see the instruments. Well, that wasn't too good. So they got a new one that didn't reflect like that. And of course it's heated to keep moisture out so it doesn't fog over. There's over here on the right-hand side, there's a little feeding port. You can just barely see it in the corner there. So you can stick a feeding tube in there and stick it in your mouth, and you can suck up liquid, or you can eat, baby food, something that's really liquid. And that was especially handy on the long missions. Everything in the standard survival kit that all Air Force airplanes had, except we had a special dinghy that had a platform on it on one end so that you could climb up into the dinghy with your suit on, because there's no way you're going to get in that dinghy without somebody on the platform and climb on. And we did that. Went down to Panama Beach, Florida, Tyndall Air Force Base, took us out in the ocean, dressed in our suits, kicked us off the back of a speedboat with the parachute up there. Parachute dragging us in the wind. You had to disconnect from the parachute, swim over and get in the dinghy. We did all that stuff for real. Not just in the swimming pool, but out in the ocean with the real stuff. I didn't show it to you, but then on the pilot's cockpit down at the bottom, there's a blank piece down there where the 35 millimeter map display was projected. It showed your route of your mission for that day, and it moved along at the same speed of the airplane, which was nice, except if you had to deviate, then it wasn't worth a damn because you couldn't see where you were going. Back seater had to take care of all that. Getting into the suit was fun. Before flight, we had a meal with steak and eggs. You could have coffee or juice. Most people didn't take that because those are diuretics, and you didn't want to take a diuretic, especially in the early program, because we didn't have any kind of relief facilities in our early suits. The suit lays out on the floor. You sit down in the chair, you move forward, you pull the legs up over your knees, then you stand up.
You want to go backwards?
Yeah, I thought it was going backwards. Okay. You stand up, and two guys pull it up over you. You stick your head through the neck ring. They pull it over your shoulders, get you back and zip it up. You can't do it by yourself. And theoretically, you can get out of the suit by yourself, but you have to be really flexible to get back and grab that super and pull it down. You had three garments. You had we put on long johns, then you had in part of the suit you had a body glove, really is what it amounted to, which was your pressure protection that would inflate and keep the body tight so that it wouldn't explode if you had explosive decompression. And then you had the outer garment, which primarily was protection from the elements. It was the inner garment that protected your body and kept you alive. The guys in PSD, the Physiological Support Division, that's why we call it PSD, would test the suit, be sure all the pressure things worked, your face heater, your oxygen connections all worked, all that stuff was working like it's supposed to. They do a pressure check. And then we would pre-breathe for about 30 minutes to get all the nitrogen out of your body, because you should have explosive decompression, and you have nitrogen, you're going to get the meds. Which was really neat, because you could lay back there in that chair, you're all in cocoon, and that was nap time. And I took a nap every day before flight for about 15 minutes. It was great. You're all relaxed and ready to go. This is also one of the later model suits, the gold one. Oops. Well, that was that's Bob Gilliland. He was our first test pilot for the airplane the first time. And he's in the Gemini suit, and that's what we had. Bob and I were in the first 25 crews, we were number 20, the first 25 crews to qualify in the airplane, and we flew the Gemini suits. The later crews that came behind us, they got the more modern suits, and even had the built-in release systems for urine collection. And the bigger suit, much more comfortable. So we broke the code, we broke the pathway for the other guys to come behind us. Getting in the airplane, you talk about being spoiled. You climb up the ladder and you sit down, and these two guys swarm. And they hook up your oxygen cables, they hook up your radio cables, they hook up your ejection seat and your parachute. They get your cables in your stirrups. The picture didn't show it, but you wore stirrups on your boots. which hooked into cables, which would, if you ejected, these cables would snap your legs back against the seat, so your legs wouldn't flail and you bailed out and hit the copper. They hook all that stuff up. You just sit there, don't touch anything, just sit there like that, and get you all hooked up, and then they pull the pins, safety pins out of the seat, and when they're all done. And this happened on both sides, front and back. Engine start, here we go. Okay, taxi. Taxi is kind of critical because there's enough residual thrust at idle that the airplane will taxi at about 60 miles an hour, and that's too fast. So you're riding the brakes most of the time, not only not to go too fast, but also keep the tire temperature down. Riding the brakes does keep the tire temperature down. It makes the brakes warm, but it keeps the tire temperature down. Okay, there we are. That's what it looks like head on, just before brake release. Now here you can see a little better. The inlets are pointed down and a little bit in. Take off. 210 knots in 20 seconds. When those burners light, you're going to go. They never light together. There's always a little thump like that, but you're on your way. Go out to hit a tanker right away, and then you're off and on your training mission. That's the Earth from, how high does it say? 80,000 feet. Curvature. The sky is black. It's beautiful. Down below is the topopause. You can see major articles on the ground. You can see lakes. You can see big cities, but you can't see any detail. And part of that's because you're sitting in this thing and you can't get your head over to see out anyway. So you're looking out at a pretty serious angle. Lake Tahoe. There's a quick look at what we can cover. 10,000 feet of film, 100,000 miles. The camera's pointing whenever they need to, whichever point for the selected targets. And the resolution was magnificent. We could read the license plate number on a car in a parking lot. For that day and age, that was outstanding. For refueling, I mentioned earlier we had a radio that connected to the tank, so we could get our starting arrow point, both of us at the same time in the right place. About every 2 hours you had to refuel. Now, these are kind of out of sequence because I didn't build this thing, but the Habu patch. After your first operational sortie, you're awarded the Habu patch. This particular one says SR-71. Some of them had question marks where it says SR. And my son said, "What's the question marks for?" I said, "That's for the number of missions you flew. 1 or 100 more, nobody knows." The Mach 3 patch was worn by everybody associated in any manner, means, or any way with the airplane, in the program, to honor those people who participated. That patch, by the way, was designed by one of our crew members. That's just a name tag. I'm sure you know everything. The air refueling receptacle is right behind the second cockpit. Here's the shiny spot is the astro tracker, and the air refueling door, as you can see, is open right there. Information on how long it takes and how much we transfer. Toward the end of the track, we get heavy and the tanker gets a little lighter. But we get so heavy and we're so slow we have to go into afterburner to stay with the tank. Refueling an afterburner is no big deal except in the weather. And I got the worst case of vertigo I had ever had flying an airplane. One day refueling in the weather. But you got the guy in the back seat, he watches over me and keeps me out of trouble. You're a min burner. The object of the game, of course, is to reach the end AR point with full tanks, and away you go. That's the position behind the KC-135. That's behind the KC-10. Sometimes we use 2 tanks, in which case we use the right-hand tanker first. That's the position the pilot would see behind the KC-10. I never did a 10, I only did 135s. That's the picture from the 135. The 135 has pilot director lights and that thing up forward up front, but nobody ever used them. You just flew formation on the tanker because that kept you in position. You knew where you were. I'll tell you why. There's why you never paid attention to those damn lights. There they are right there. They give you up and down, in and out, back and forth. The boomer may have used them, but the pilots never did. In other words, they're strictly formation on the airplane. That's what the airplane looks like from the boomer's position of a KC-135. That's the boom on a KC-135. You see the shiny spots on the wings of the airplane? That's the fuel seeping out of the fuel tanks because the airplane is not hot, it's cold, and the fuel is cold. There's an even better picture. That's the trainer, the raised cockpit, and you can see the fuel just meshing off the wings there. That's the first STRATCOM patch. This patch goes all the way back to the first Aero Squadron of the Army Air Corps back in World War I. Squadron patch, Army wing patch. I got past it, but that previous picture was the developing process, wet developing process of the film. Remember, this is film, not digital. All got to be processed. Color film also. The best pictures were taken with black and white. The resolution is a whole lot better than that. There's the Sky Dome, Kingdom, I mean. Beale Air Force Base in color. Just a gee whiz. Faster than a speeding bullet, leaps tall buildings in a single bound. Thank you. Sayonara. Farewell. The airplane was retired for two reasons. It didn't have real-time relay to the theater commanders. And it costs so very much to operate. And quite frankly, by this time in the Air Force hierarchy, SAC had been, was going to be disbanded. We didn't know it, but they did. As we used to say, the fighter mafia had control, and they didn't want the airplane. They wanted that money to buy more fighters, et cetera, et cetera. Lockheed didn't do us any real favors by making recovery any cheaper than it might have been. And at this time, the overhead systems had achieved maturity, and they were getting better pictures, and they were able to move around and so forth. And the airplane, unfortunately, was retired. I still think, and I think there's a film clip down at the museum where I say it, when the airplane was retired, given the world situation at the time, I still think, even then, we could have gone any place in the world we wanted to, at least once. Might not have wanted to go back on exactly the same track the second time, we could have. And there's nothing that gets the enemy's attention quicker than that unique double sonic boom of the SR-71 at 80,000 feet when you didn't even know he was there. And he's gone before you know he came. Okay, a couple of gee whiz things that you ought to hear. In 1961, the B-58 set a new speed record, taking away from the Russians, thank you very much. And that speed record was set by a native son of Harvard, Hal Confer from Culbertson, Nebraska, for which he won the Bendix Trophy. Incidentally, Hal Confer is also the only native Nebraskan to have been mission qualified in the SR-71. He was admitted into the Nebraska Aviation Hall of Fame in 1998, and I sponsored him, but I'm so proud of that. The altitude and speed records for the SR, 85,068 feet. New York to London in 1 hour and 54 minutes. London to LA in 3 hours and 47 minutes. But here's the one I like. St. Louis to Cincinnati, 8 minutes and 31 seconds. Okay, hey, Scottsbluff to Omaha, that's about 450 miles, maybe a little more, about 10 minutes. There isn't anybody here tonight that drove less than 10 minutes to get here, right? Put that in your pipe and smoke it. How does the airplane fly? I got to pilot talk here a little bit. All airplanes talk. They all speak to you. The point is, do you listen to them when they talk? It's like your wife or girlfriend. you damn well better listen when she talks to you, because if you don't, you're going to be in trouble. Right? We all know that. Some of us had to learn it the hard way. It took me 2 lives when I got a good one down. Anyway, you're in that suit. You're isolated. You have no sound. You have no feel. All you have is your eyes to see things. So even though the SR may talk to you a little bit, chances are you're not going to hear what she has to say until it happens. So you pay attention with your eyes, you watch everything, and the minute you turn your back on her, she's going to kick you. That's every time. Every time. It flies well, it's got big control surfaces on it, but it's a big airplane. It's 107 feet long, 50 feet wide, but it responds well, it's stable. It's a good instrument platform, although we hardly ever flew instruments, but it's a good instrument platform. Landing is a piece of cake. That double delta wing gives you a ground effect that just cushions you in just as nice as can be. I won't say you can't make a hard landing, but you got to try. And of course, when the big chute comes out, and when you pull that handle to deploy the chute, you put your hand against the dashboard, because when that chute comes out, it's going to pitch you forward. Catch a big 50-foot chute, stops you at about 4,000 feet. I can't say it was fun to fly the airplane because it was hard work, but it was rewarding and enjoyable. And for a farm boy from Illinois who went to Cow College and then got into the Air Force kind of by mistake because of Korea, it was the highlight of my career. And I'm quite sure I wouldn't have made full colonel if I hadn't flown an airplane. Okay, questions, folks, please. Anything at all. Oh, one more thing I forgot. I talked about the later modernized chutes. Suits. We had no relief facilities in the early suits. And we had guys who piddled in their suit. I mean, it was routine. Later on, we got a modified jockey short that they could put on. And the suit had tubes in it, and we had little bottles in the pat legs, in the bottom of the pat legs. So you were able to relieve yourself without embarrassing yourself too much. And on some of those 13-hour missions, that was a vital necessity. Questions?
I have one for you. I thought they made about 30 airplanes, and it looks like there's only maybe 11 or 15.
Somewhere around there they had the record. We had 32, I think, to start with. We lost, I don't know, 4 or 5 in test force. We lost about 4 or 5 in operational for various things. The greatest thing of all, though, is that in the 25 years the airplane was operational, we never lost any bodies. Never lost any people. The airplanes we lost were primarily mechanical. We did learn early on that the airplane has a pitch-up tendency. If you get too slow, the airflow across the inlets is not adequate to keep the airplane flying. It'll do a one-on-one on you, it'll go backwards. We lost a couple of airplanes, one at night that way. Mostly coming off the tanker, you got too slow. Somebody over here. Yes.
I got one for you. Were you part of the crew that flew one over Millard and mistake off the Air Force Base?
Thankfully, no, I was not.
I was a teenager and I was floating in my pool, and all of a sudden the sky went black because I lived right next to the Millard Airport. It was just black, and the windows were shaking.
Fortunately, that got treated pretty much as a joke, but it was really pretty serious. That was General Campbell's retirement ceremony that day, and they had all kinds of airplanes. And the SR, of course, he was in the SR early on. I knew him; he was quite a guy. He was an aeronautical engineer, and every Monday morning we would have a crew meeting and sit down and talk about what had happened with the airplane and what modifications were made and so forth. And Bill Campbell had the unique capability to put all this technical stuff in layman's language. And I learned so much from him about aerodynamics and engines and that kind of stuff. It's just amazing, this marvelous guy. But yeah, that was a little bit of an embarrassment. Then here comes the SR-71. That ain't off at Air Force Base. Yes?
Do they have anything equivalent to that today? Do you know? Close to it?
I don't know. My guess is, and this is strictly my own interpretation, the X-37, which is an orbiting craft they launched out of Vandenberg, it's flown, I don't know how many times, 3 or 4 at least, gone into Earth orbit and come back. In terms of an air breather like this, I don't think so. Although I did read in an excerpt from Popular Mechanics a couple of weeks ago that NASA is taking the J-58 engine and trying to modify it so it might be able to fly at Mach 5 instead of Mach 3. Now you got to understand that the technological problems between Mach 1 and Mach 3 are supervision and modify it to be a ramjet, which is what we did with this airplane. Pretty tough. It probably can be done. I think they can probably do it. As far as an air platform goes, somebody asked me a long time ago, what was the follow-on to the SR-71? And I said, a Porsche 911, black, of course. Thank you, folks. Thank you so very much. Thank you for your attention.
How many years did you fly the SR-71?
I flew from 1967 to 70, 3 years. I had 3 tours in Southeast Asia.
Is that the normal term for SR-71?
Yeah, normally. We had a couple of guys that managed to be professional pilots and stay with it for a long time. One of the guys, I think, got about 1,500 hours, which is very unusual. Most guys were in and out in 3 or 4 years, something like that.
You know, they had like a rotation scheme that they had? Or...
There was no particular rhyme or reason to it. When they shut the program down, the personnel people at SAC headquarters just took them and said, you're just a pilot, we'll throw you someplace. Some guys went on and fly something else. Some guys got out of the service and went to commercial flight.
So you could just volunteer? Were you picked or volunteered
For the program?
for the program?
Yeah. When Johnson announced the airplane, shortly thereafter, SAC came out with an application for the airplane, which I immediately jumped on and filled out. And my boss called me one day and he said, Charlie, why did you do this? And I said, because I'm tired of flying big airplanes. And I said, but more seriously, flying bombers is a serious mission. And if we ever have to execute that mission, God help us. I'll do it if I have to, but I don't want to. I said, I want to go out and do something where I can see what I did, contribute today, not just be on the sidelines prepared for an emergency. For whatever good that did, I don't know. Anyway, that was 1965. I got transferred up to KI Sawyer in Michigan, B-52s in the wintertime. And I was approaching my 35th birthday, which is supposed to be the age limit. So I called SAC headquarters to talk to the assignment people, and this guy answered the phone and said, Harlan Hayne. I said, who? I didn't know Harlan at the time. He said, I got your paperwork right here. We're going to send a message out, have you out to deal for an interview. And I said, like myself, yeah, sure, and the check's in the mail. He did. And the next, when I came off alert that week, the Wing Commander called me in the office and he said, Charlie, I got this message here. It says you're going to go to the SR-71. And I said, no, sir, I'm going to go for an interview. I did, and Doug Nelson was the Wing Commander at the time. And he said, I need 2 pilots, one for academics and one for simulator. I said, simulator? Because I didn't want to be an academic instructor. I'd done that already. Didn't like it. And so he hired me on the spot. Later on, they got more critical and they made guys come out and do interviews and fly the T-38 and all that kind of good stuff. And so in a way, I kind of snuck in under the thing, but I sure was glad it happened. My RSO had been up at Plattsburgh at the same time I was in B-47s. At that time, Plattsburgh was what they called a super wing. We had 4 squadrons of tankers and 4 squadrons of B-47s. He was in a different squadron than I was in. I didn't know he was there. We didn't know each other until we got thrown together out at Beale. There was no effort to match people up, personalities or anything like that. You were a pilot, you were an RSO, and you need one, and you need one, they just put you together. Bob and I got along great, and we've seen each other off and on over the years quite frequently. It just worked out that way. I guess I don't want to brag exactly, but I don't think there's any other crew pair throughout the whole program that are as close as we would become.
So where'd you operate at, basically? Where'd you fly out?
Kadena.
Kadena?
I only flew out of Kadena. And I only flew Vietnam missions. We had Korea missions out of Kadena, but I never got one. We had 3 crews on board. You had a crew to fly, a mission crew, you had a backup crew, and you had a standby crew. So every 3 days, your name came up, and sometimes you flew, and sometimes you didn't. Sometimes it was a training mission, sometimes you had an op sortie. You just luck of the draw.
Did you like Okinawa?
It wasn't too bad then. Yeah, they were more friendly. We had a big contingent. We had a bunch of Marines who were there, and the Air Force had B-52s stationed out of Okinawa. So we had a huge presence, and it was. And then we were only there for 90 days, so it was a short tour. Yes.
So you said this was a very difficult plane to fly. What was your favorite plane to fly?
The T-38.
Sports car with a jet set. Fun little airplane. It's stupid. I'd love to have one, but I can't afford it. We used the T-38 for training, instrument training, and for proficiency. And we got to fly it usually a couple times a week. And that was always a fun time. And after I left the program, they started letting the RSOs fly with their pilots in the T-38. And my RSO was a licensed pilot, so that was great to have him know how to fly as well. It was a fun airplane.
The SR-71 only worked out of a few or a handful of bases, but Beale and Kadena.
Beale, Kadena, and Rice Norton. Rice Norton? No. In England. What was that base name? It wasn't Rice Norton. It's where the RC-135s used to go. And speaking of the RC-135s, you know. No. There you go. Thank you. In the reconnaissance world after World War II closed, and we had the hot Cold War, we used RB-29s, RB-36s, RB-47s, and of course the RC-135 for reconnaissance missions. And of course, none of those are overflights; they're all peripheries. And of course, we lost a couple of B-47s. The Russians shot them down, and we lost the B-36s and a couple of B-29s the same way. So the U-2 was the first airplane intended and designed for reconnaissance overflights. And it was doing fine until the Russians got an SA-2 that got as high as the U-2 was and shot it down. And if Eisenhower hadn't given away the right to overfly Russia, I think we would have. At least we would have a couple of times anyway with the SR.
Did you ever see the film that you had just taken and been told the results of
No.
how it was applied?
They wouldn't tell us that. And the reason was that we were supposed to be strictly crew members. We weren't supposed to have any knowledge of what they were looking for, what we were looking for, what they wanted. In order to protect us, we could honestly say, I don't know if that came to pass.
All your missions were pre-planned. You just flew the pattern that they sent you,
Exactly.
and you did nothing other than that.
All I
You
did-
had to do the deviate for some reason.
I drove the airplane. The guy in the back seat ran all the navigation system. He ran all the cameras and everything else. Mostly though, if everything worked right, he just watched it, see it did it the right place at the right time. And but my job was just to drive the airplane. And sometimes, like one time coming over to Chicago, the airplane didn't turn when it was supposed to. So we turned a little late. Those kind of things. The airplane had another unique thing I pilots would appreciate. I think it was an illusion, but the nose of the airplane, when you roll the navigation guidance, rolls you up into a 45-degree bank at a trim point. Well, 45 degrees isn't particularly steep, but at the roll rate of the SR-71, it's really fast. And it looks like the nose of the airplane will tell you if you're going to turn right, it'll go left, it'll go right, and then it'll come back left. I don't think that's what really happened, but it sure looked like that when the airplane turned. And I was always concerned because such a rapid roll rate, if you should get an unstart on that inboard engine, you're going to have a little trouble. Never happened, fortunately. I didn't like the roll rate on the autopilot. It was just too fast. We used to use 60 degrees of bank in the traffic pattern when we were flying manually, but it's a 2G airplane, and as you know, 2Gs and 60 degrees is 2Gs, so we quit doing that because you're right on the edge of the G limit for the airplane. Thank you for your attention. Thank you for your attention.
Again, Charlie, thank you very much.
My pleasure. My pleasure.
You stick around for a few minutes if they have questions, because some people are shy and won't ask questions.
Come and get it. Come and get it.
Thank you very much.
You want to keep that?